As of this writing, the outcomes of the cases have yet to be determined. The government uses the drug war to justify taking away our rights guaranteed by the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures, and bars search warrants on anything but those based upon probable cause of criminal activity and issued by judges. Since the war on drugs began almost 4 decades ago, most searches and seizures reaching the United States Supreme Court have been approved. According to Yale Law School professor Stephen Duke, the court has held that a search based on an invalid warrant does not require any remedy so long as the police acted in good faith. So people can be stopped in their cars or in airports, trains, or buses, and then submitted to questioning or held to be sniffed by dogs. Police may search an open field without warrant or cause, even if trespassing on it would otherwise be a criminal offense. Police may use helicopters to look into our homes and backyards, private property they could not lawfully or constitutionally enter without a search warrant. They can search our garbage bags without giving a reason. And if they have reasonable suspicion, the police may search our bodies. The erosion of our Fourth Amendment rights caused by the war on drugs has not been confined to cases involving drugs either, Duke explains. The pressure to uphold police activities in drug cases generates new principles that thereafter apply to everyone, whether or not drugs are involved. If the police are authorized to search for drugs on suspicion, they can also search for evidence of tax evasion, gambling, mail fraud, pornography, bribery, and any other offense. The putative object of a police search does not limit what can be confiscated. If police conduct is a lawful search, they can take and use any evidence they see, however unrelated it may be to what got them into the home, or the body, in the first place. So, even people who have never touched a drug in their lives are subject to the loss of Fourth Amendment rights brought about by the war on drugs, because a supine judiciary, cowed by the need to appear anti-drugs, has lowered the bar for what police conduct is lawful and constitutional. There are many examples of wrong-door raids, where the police bust into the homes of individuals only to find that they entered the wrong house and found no drugs. For example, New York City police accidentally entered into the wrong house during a pre-dawn raid. They handcuffed Minnie Matos, a deaf, asthmatic, Coney Island woman, while her children cried. Ms. Matos begged the police to permit her to use her asthma pump, but she was ignored until the officers realized they entered the wrong apartment. In 2003, the NYPD mistakenly raided the home of a 57-year-old woman. The violent manner in which they entered the apartment literally scared her to death, as she died of a heart attack on the scene. And it is far from surprising that one of these raids could scare someone to death. These types of raids are typically carried out by masked, heavily armed SWAT teams using paramilitary tactics more appropriate for the battlefield than the living room. In fact, the rise in no-knock warrants over the last 25 years neatly corresponds with the rise in the number and frequency of use of SWAT teams. One very tragic story involved state law enforcement agents who raided the home of Kai Calvo, the mayor of Berwyn Heights, Maryland, after the agents tracked a package containing marijuana that was left on the front porch of Calvo's house. Calvo brought the package into the house, and the drug agents burst into the house without warning, shot and killed Calvo's 2 dogs, and bound Calvo and his mother-in-law. Sadly, this was all a mistake made by the agents. Neither Calvo nor anyone in his home had anything to do with the drugs. In November 2006, a 92-year-old woman was shot and killed in her Atlanta home when 3 officers raided it on a drug bust. Catherine Johnston, the elderly woman who was killed, did not have any drugs. The police had the wrong house. The officers had obtained a search warrant after an undercover officer had allegedly purchased drugs at Johnston's home earlier in the day on question. The warrant was also a no-knock warrant, meaning that they could come into the home without asking the occupant to let them in. The officers announced themselves as police and broke down the front door. Out of fear, Johnston used a gun her niece bought for her protection and shot at the officers, wounding them. In retaliation, they shot back and murdered her. Johnston had lived in her home on 933 Neal Street in northwest Atlanta for 17 years. Johnston's distraught niece, Sarah Dozier, was mad as hell and stated that the police had shot her down like a dog. By the end of 2008, all 3 officers had pled guilty to various felonies in connection with the massacre. They began serving substantial prison sentences in early 2009. Drug money supports terror. The Office of National Drug Control Policy has begun running ads that say, "Drug money supports terror." The ads ask, where do terrorists get their money? If you buy drugs, some of it might come from you. This is another lie. Here is a kernel of truth the government fails to comprehend. It is not the demand for drugs that is responsible for nurturing and harboring terrorists. It is the prohibition of the drugs that wreaks the most global havoc. Drugs are profitable because there is a ban on them, and items found on the black market generally are not cheap. So while the government goes and blames terrorism on people who buy drugs, it is the government itself that is actually perpetuating terrorism through its nonsensical drug policies. Apart from that, plenty of your tax money was used to fund these fruitless ads. In fact, the war on drugs is responsible for a great deal of violence around the world. Recently, there have been many brutal killings and much horrific violence related to the drug cartels in Mexico, who have been warring with Mexican and U.S. officials. All of this was in the name of the drug war. Drug lords are engaging in a violent competition to export illegal drugs into the U.S. and reap the great rewards of the black market. As a result, these gang drug wars caused by the government war on drugs, many innocent people have lost their lives. Since January 2007, there have been an estimated 9,903 drug-related deaths in Mexico, more than the U.S. fatalities thus far in the Iraq War. Many children have also been exposed to the brutal war. In Tijuana, school children have seen bodies hung from overpasses and stuffed into refrigerators. Furthermore, 12 corpses with their tongues cut out were dumped into a vacant lot across from an elementary school. The stories are downright tragic. The war on big government. The war on drugs has been a disaster for America. Using drugs, killing babies in our wombs, and taking our own lives are all actions committed against our bodies. Yet while the government permits us to have abortions and commit suicide, and lets us get high on one chemical, alcohol, it prohibits us from getting high on other chemicals which it calls drugs. Does that make any sense? Everyone should have the right to make choices about his or her own body, period. While on a larger scale, the war on drugs is about wasteful government expenditure and an infringement on our Fourth Amendment rights, on a more personal level, it is about the choices individuals make concerning their own bodies. We should be allowed to control what enters our bodies. If someone very badly wants to ingest a chemical substance into his body, he should be able to do so regardless of any government law, and thousands do so every day. According to Professor Murray Rothbard, propagandize against cigarettes as much as you want, but leave the individual free to run his own life. Otherwise, we may as well outlaw all sorts of possible carcinogenic agents, including tight shoes, improperly fitting false teeth, excessive exposure to the sun, as well as excessive intake of ice cream, eggs, and butter, which might lead to heart disease. And if such prohibitions prove unenforceable, again the logic is to place people in cages so that they will receive the proper amount of sun, the correct diet, properly fitting shoes, and so on. Furthermore, we know from the utter ineffectiveness of prohibition that drug laws will never serve as a deterrent to drug use. Will Rogers once opined that instead of giving money to found colleges to promote learning, why don't they pass a constitutional amendment prohibiting anybody from learning anything? If it works as good as the prohibition one did, why in 5 years we would have the smartest race of people on Earth. Rogers was being facetious, but he certainly has a point. Generally, someone who seeks to disobey laws that punish victimless crimes does not look up the jail sentence for the crime he is about to commit. So why criminalize drug use and give drug users and sellers long stints in prison? Do these laws really change people's mindsets? Hardly. There is no logic here, and billions of dollars per year are wasted because of this lack of foresight. On this issue, Milton Friedman wrote, "Every friend of freedom must be as revolted as I am by the prospect of turning the United States into an armed camp, by the vision of jails filled with casual drug users and of an army of enforcers empowered to invade the liberty and property of citizens on slight evidence." Finally, America's children have also often fallen victim to the drug war. Getting in trouble with the law at a young age follows many youngsters into adulthood. These children are plagued with emotional baggage and possibly a criminal record simply for trying to satisfy their curiosities. If we really want to raise healthy, happy children, it is up to families, peer groups, and communities to restrict harmful behavior, not the government. Close-knit relationships and good examples reach much further than the government ever could, and they do not cost taxpayers a dime. We must stop this foolish war, and stop letting the government talk us into it year after year, election after election. As we learned throughout this book, the government does two things very well. It scares us to death and it spends our money. The war on drugs is no different than any other government scam employed to steal our money. When will there be a war on big government, in which the taxpayers will get money from Washington to keep the federal government from spiraling out of control?